So when you first started messing around on the Dulcimer, what kind of stuff were you playing on it?
It was American tunes, because that's pretty much where Jim, that's where he came from musically. He's from Massachusetts, and so yeah, I started playing old-timey music, things like Soldier's Joy and Golden Slippers and all those kind of old standards from America. And it wasn't until many years later that I started branching out into English folk. So yeah, a lot of it was American tunes.
And is it quite an adaptable instrument, or do you have to kind of pick and choose the music that goes well for it?
In a certain sense, yeah, because it's quite limited musically, in as much that it's a diatonic instrument. It doesn't have many of the black notes that you would find on a piano, for instance. So it does have some, but for all intents and purposes, it's diatonic, and so that does limit you to certain things. You can't play jazz on it. But yeah, those are really the only real limitations. I've been asked to play for things like psychedelic trance records, and which it goes really well with, because a lot of the repeating patterns that you get on those sorts of tracks suit the thing really well. And orchestral stuff, I was lucky enough to be asked to play with the London Philharmonic, to play with to do the soundtrack for Lord of the Rings, and that was such great fun. Being surrounded by that orchestra was just immense.
What was their reaction to a slightly more unusual instrument coming their way?
Well, I mean, I suppose every orchestra is kind of gets instruments in geared to the score, and there were quite a lot of other instruments there. There was actually another dulcimer. There was a cimbalum, which is the Eastern European version that they had there to do other little sections, and other really amazing instruments. I think they had a dubuk as well, which is sort of like I think it's like an Eastern sort of, not a clarinet so much, but that sort of wind instrument, very, very haunting. But the thing I remember most was that, as an instrument, the weirdest instrument I think there was a guy who was during one of the bits where the trolls are marching through the caves, and they had a guy with a handful of big heavy steel chain, and he was inside of a Steinway piano, just hitting the inside of it with going clang, clang, clang. I was like, oh my god, are you sure that's all right to do that? And he was like, yeah, it's okay, it's the spare Steinway.
When you're playing in duo with Saul, you are competing against possibly the loudest instrument in the world with the melodeon. So is it good to kind of let rip?
It's great, yeah. Yes, it is a loud instrument, and it is fantastic to be able to play at the volume that I like to play at. Obviously there are lots of quiet bits, but it is, as you say, great to be able to let rip. He is very loud, and I love that. I think that's years of playing for Morris sides and playing outside and needing to be heard. But yeah, it's fantastic. I play in other bands where I really do have to rein it back and just play very quietly. But I do love playing loudly. It's great. I think you get a nicer tone out of it as well. I think the more you play a dulcimer, the more you bash it. I think that the more it tends to settle, and the more the instrument gives you back, I think.
One of the other interesting things that you've done is with Jennifer Crook, you performed the music for the Private Life Plants for David Attenborough.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, it's doing sort of session work for TV is a really interesting way of working. Something that was certainly new to me at the time, and we had a certain amount of free rein to do that. I mean, a lot of the parts were highly arranged, and it was just a matter of playing what we were told. But there were certain parts. I remember there was a bit in the Private Life of Plants where there were these thing called radar poppies, I think they were called, and it was when the snow melts, and these tiny little flowers, alpine things, would kind of track the sun across the top of the sky before the sun went in, and we were let kind of loose to sort of improvise little tingly bits and stuff as it did that. So we had a TV monitor in the studio with us, so we could actually watch the VT as we were playing to get sort of inspiration for it. I'm also in a band with a girl called Tina Malley, who's I suppose you could describe as sort of electro folk, sort of experimental electro folk, and that's quite exciting. We're just sort of in the process of being signed at the moment to I think it's called Gramophone Records, I think. So yes, that's going to take up a lot of my time. I think that's going to be growing as the weeks go on. These are pairs of strings that go over these bridges, and they meet in the middle. So the strings that come over this bridge here cross the strings that come over the bridges in that way, and they cross in the middle. So you basically play very close to these bridges here. You don't stray into the middle where the strings cross, otherwise you'll just start fouling with other notes. So yeah, you basically play to get a major scale. You just pick one of these black ones and go 4 up one side, and then across from where you started, and 4 up the other side to get your major scales, and that works across this gap as well, and so on and so forth, up and all around. Yeah, so it's actually really difficult to keep in tune, because like I was saying, each note has a pair of strings, pretty much like the top 2 strings on a 12-string guitar. But whereas the 2 strings on a 12-string guitar have got separate tuning heads, this is actually just one piece of string that comes over from this side over the bridge to form a 5th, goes round a peg and back again, and to form the other string, the other 5th. So you've actually got 4 notes there with one piece of string. So it's a real juggling act to try and keep it in. It's a real sort of compromise, and you end up fiddling with the tiny little adjustments on the sides here, and any which way you can to coax it into tune.
And how do you actually play it?
You play it with these, called hammers, and most people, when they see them for the first time, sort of think that they're sort of spoons or something, which is quite nice. But yeah, as you can see, they're actually flat, and they're just made out of a hard wood normally. And yeah, they've got this little handle here which you put between your first finger and your thumb, and yeah, and you play it like that. I tend to, when I teach, for beginners, I tend to sort of try and explain it to them as though you're, trying to flick ink onto the back of the neck of the kid in front with your ruler, like you did at school. Or maybe you didn't. But that kind of movement. It's quite a it's quite a delicate grip that you need to have on it. Some hammers, some of the other dulcimers that you get, because the dulcimer's got a massively long and quite intriguing history, goes back to, well, thousands of years, they say. Some say that it goes back about 2,000 years, and some people think it goes back further than that, maybe 3,500, 5,000 years ago.
Can you tell us about this particular dulcimer?
It was given to me by Jim Couza's wife Karen at his funeral. He died last year, and he was my very close friend and mentor and my teacher. Well, I was actually a rock drummer when I first met Jim, or trying to be anyway, at 13, wanna be, and yeah, he used to sort of leave it lying about the house when, and I used to like sneak goes on it when he was out, and I just found it very, very, very much like drums. It's a stick in each hand, and before I knew what I was doing, I was playing dulcimer, and yeah, my rock drumming career was sabotaged into becoming a folkie. But yeah, since I've been given this one, I've just been playing it non-stop, really. It's just an amazing thing to be given the very instrument that inspired you, and that yeah, every time I play it, it just makes me feel connected to Jim somehow.